The hallway was supposed to be empty that evening, a quiet space behind the tall glass doors of the hotel where the award ceremony rehearsals were happening. Most people had rushed out to catch their rides or finish last-minute fittings, and the crew members were gathered at the far end preparing for the next day. But something unexpected held the light in that hallway, like a soft glow that didn't belong to the cold white lamps above. A few people who were passing by slowed their steps without even understanding why. It felt like something gentle, something rare, was happening just around the corner. And when their eyes caught sight of Sandra and Keanu standing close together, talking in voices so soft they seemed to blend with the hum of the hallway, everyone felt a pull inside their chest that they couldn't explain. Sandra leaned against the wall, her hands loosely folded in front of her as if she was trying to hide the trembling in her fingers. She looked tired in a way she usually hid well, but tonight her face showed a sadness she hadn't spoken about to anyone except him. And Keanu, standing inches away, watched her with a quiet concern that made the moment feel almost fragile. He wasn't saying much, but something in his eyes told her she could let down the walls she carried everywhere. People usually saw the calm, composed actor who always handled the world with gentle patience. But here, alone with Sandra, he looked different. He looked open, vulnerable, and deeply present. Maybe this was why the few people who saw them couldn't walk away. They felt like they were witnessing something real, something unfiltered in a world that was always trying to be perfect. Hook of this moment began long before they stepped into that hallway. Earlier in the evening, Sandra had received news that cracked the careful balance she tried to maintain in her life. She had been carrying the weight of an emotional struggle for months, silently fighting moments of doubt, fear, and loneliness while trying to appear strong in public. She thought she had buried it well. She thought she could handle it alone. But when she saw Keanu backstage during the rehearsal and he simply said, "You look tired, are you okay?" Her chest tightened and something inside her almost broke. She shook her head, trying to brush it off, but he didn't believe her. He knew her too well. And without pushing or demanding answers, he quietly walked with her until they reached the hallway where no one else could hear what she was afraid to say. She didn't want to cry, she didn't want to show weakness, but the moment she leaned against the wall and tried to speak, her voice cracked. She told him about the message she received, about the person from her past who had reached out and reopened an old wound she thought had healed. She told him about the fear of failing her family, of feeling like she was losing control of the stability she had worked so hard to build. And when she said the words she had been afraid to admit even to herself, "I feel like I'm falling apart, and I don't know how to stop it," it felt like the world paused around them. Keanu didn't step back, he didn't offer empty words, he didn't try to fix everything in a single sentence. Instead, he stepped closer, slow and gentle as if he was approaching something sacred. He placed his hand lightly on her shoulder. It was a quiet gesture, but it carried a strength she needed, a steadiness that made her breathe again. His voice came out low and warm. He told her she wasn't falling apart. He told her she wasn't alone. He told her that every person in the world who looked strong still carried storms inside them, and the bravery wasn't in hiding them, but in facing them with honesty. Then he said something that made Sandra's eyes fill instantly. He said, "I'm here. Even if you think you don't deserve support, you do, and I'm not going anywhere." That was the moment a wardrobe assistant walking by froze. She felt something inside her stir, and she didn't even understand why. Maybe it was because it had been a long time since she had witnessed true tenderness between two people without cameras, without scripts, without pretense. Maybe it was because their friendship was the kind that carried a softness the world rarely spoke about. Maybe it was because the hallway, for a few seconds, felt like a window into a truth that people often ignored. That love could be quiet, steady, and deeply respectful. Sandra finally let out a breath she had been holding for too long. She covered her face with both hands, trying to control the rising emotion that kept spilling over. Her shoulders trembled and her voice cracked again as she whispered an apology, saying she didn't want to burden him. But Keanu stepped even closer and gently removed her hands from her face, holding them for a moment so she wouldn't hide from him. He told her she didn't have to apologize for feeling human. He said life wasn't meant to be carried alone. And in that moment, Sandra realized something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. She didn't have to pretend with him. The hallway grew quieter. The soft echo of distant voices faded. And in that stillness, their connection felt almost visible. It wasn't romantic drama or grand gestures. It was something deeper, something rooted in years of mutual respect, shared experiences, and silent understanding. Keanu had always been a steady presence in her life, someone who supported her without demanding anything in return. and Sandra had always trusted him in a way that felt rare and precious. Together, they formed a bond built on honesty and kindness, a bond that people could feel even when they didn't fully understand it. Keanu asked her what scared her the most about the situation. She hesitated for a long moment before admitting that she feared losing control of her emotions in public, feared being judged, feared appearing weak. He listened without interrupting, and his presence alone helped her calm the storm inside her chest. When she finally lifted her head, he was watching her with a softness that made her heart ache. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He wasn't trying to analyze her pain. He was seeing her, not the actress, not the public figure, but the human being behind all the layers. Then something happened that none of the quiet onlookers expected. Keanu lifted his hand and gently brushed away a tear that had rolled down her cheek. His touch was so careful, as if he wasn't wiping away sadness but honoring it. Sandra leaned slightly into his palm without meaning to, seeking comfort she rarely allowed herself to accept. And in that tiny movement, their entire history seemed to unfold in the air, the years of friendship, the trust, the silent affection they never named out loud, the moments when they held each other up without telling the world. The wardrobe assistant who had been watching slowly stepped back, giving them privacy. But even as she left, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had witnessed something extraordinary. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet love, real love. The kind that lives in small gestures and honest moments, the kind that stays long after the world stops paying attention. Keanu told Sandra that she didn't have to make any decisions tonight. He told her she didn't have to be strong every second. He told her that she could lean on him anytime she needed to. And then he did something that deepened the air between them. He took her hand, not as a friend comforting another, but with a gentle certainty that made something shift inside both of them. His fingers closed around her slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. Instead, she tightened her grip, just slightly, as if saying she understood, she trusted him. She needed him in that moment more than she could express. As they stood there hand in hand, the hallway felt different, warmer, softer, like the world outside had stopped just long enough to let them breathe together. Sandra finally looked into his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, I don't know what I'd do without you." Keanu's answer came quietly, almost like a promise he hadn't planned to speak. "You'll never have to find out." And that was when a sudden noise echoed from the far end of the hallway, hurried footsteps, voices calling their names, someone saying they needed to return to the stage. Sandra's heart jumped. She quickly pulled her hand back, her breath catching as fear returned. What if someone saw them? What if people misunderstood? What if the moment they shared became a rumor she wasn't ready to face? Before she could move, Keanu stepped forward and gently placed both hands on her arms, steadying her. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but full of certainty. "Look at me," he said. "Whatever happens next, I'm with you. We'll face it together." But Sandra's eyes widened as she heard the voices coming closer. The footsteps were rushing now. Someone had already turned the corner. She didn't know what they saw. She didn't know how much of that fragile moment was now exposed. And as the first person appeared in the hallway, eyes widening at the sight of them standing so close, Sandra felt her heart stop. The moment the hallway secret almost escaped. The moment the first crew member stepped into the hallway, Sandra felt her heartbeat jump so hard it almost hurt. She instinctively moved back from Keanu, trying to create distance before anyone misunderstood what they were seeing. But the expression on the young assistant's face showed that she had already seen enough to raise questions. Her eyes widened just a little, as if she walked into something she shouldn't have. She gave an awkward smile, hesitated, and then quickly looked away. Yet even without words, Sandra could feel the silent weight of curiosity settling in the air. One unexpected witness, and the private world she shared with Keanu felt dangerously exposed. But Keanu didn't panic. He didn't step away from Sandra in a rush or pretend nothing had happened. Instead, he remained calm and steady, his gentle presence acting like an anchor in the middle of her rising fear. When he spoke to the assistant, his voice was warm and grounded, the same soft tone he used when calming her only minutes earlier. He said they would be there in a moment, asked if everything was all right, and thanked her for checking on them. The assistant nodded quickly and disappeared down the hallway, but the silence she left behind pressed heavy on Sandra's chest. Sandra exhaled slowly, trying to find her balance again, but her mind was spinning. She placed her hand against her forehead and closed her eyes, blaming herself for letting the moment become so vulnerable, so open. She whispered, "Keanu, they're going to think something, they're going to start talking." Her voice carried a tremble she didn't want him to hear, but Keanu stepped closer and shook his head gently, refusing to let fear become the center of their moment. He told her the same thing he always did when she worried too much. People will think whatever they want. We can't live our lives based on their guesses. But this time, she couldn't let his reassurance settle easily. She kept thinking about the timing, the intensity of the conversation, the way she had leaned into him, the way he had brushed her tear away. It didn't matter that their connection came from kindness and trust. The outside world rarely understood the softness between two people without trying to twist it into something dramatic. Keanu saw the worry growing in her eyes, so he reached out and touched her hand again. His fingers brushed hers lightly, careful but grounding. He told her to take a breath. He reminded her that the truth didn't change just because someone walked in. Their friendship, their care for each other, their quiet bond, none of it was wrong. And even if rumors started, they would face it together just as they faced every other unexpected moment life had thrown at them. But Sandra's fear didn't come from the world alone. It came from something deeper, a growing feeling she had been trying to avoid for months. The more time she spent with Keanu, the more she noticed a tender ache inside her, a warmth she wasn't ready to name. And moments like the one they just shared made her realize how much it scared her. The thought of her feelings becoming public before she even understood them herself made her chest tight. She whispered softly, I don't want to hurt you. I don't want something like this to become a burden for you." Keanu looked surprised by her words, and a softness touched his expression. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. He told her she could never be a burden, not in any world, not in any version of life. He reminded her that he chose to be there with her, chose to listen, chose to care. He told her that what they shared wasn't something shameful or fragile. It was something real, something human, something that mattered. His words landed gently inside her, warming the cold knot of fear. But before she could respond, another crew member rushed into the hallway calling for them again, explaining that the director needed to redo the final walkthrough before locking the set for the night. This time, Sandra straightened, wiping the last traces of emotion from her face. She forced her shoulders to relax, even though her hands were still trembling slightly. Keanu watched her closely, giving her a moment to collect herself before they rejoined everyone. As they walked back toward the rehearsal area, Sandra kept her eyes forward, avoiding the curious glances from the few people still lingering around. But even through her discomfort, she felt Keanu's steady presence beside her. He didn't crowd her, but he didn't distance himself either. He walked beside her with quiet strength, silently reminding her that she wasn't facing any of it alone. But she also knew that this wasn't just about a moment in a hallway. It was part of something bigger, something unfolding inside both of them, slowly and gently, like a truth waiting to be spoken. The walkthrough went smoothly, but Sandra noticed something different in the director's behavior. He kept glancing at her and Keanu more than usual, as if trying to read something unspoken. Sandra tried to ignore it, focusing on the instructions, but her mind kept returning to the hallway, to the moment she had almost collapsed, to how Keanu had held her hands as if he was afraid she would slip away. She wondered how much of that vulnerability showed on her face even now, how much people could sense without hearing a single word. When the rehearsal ended and everyone gathered to leave, Sandra felt a wave of exhaustion wash through her. She needed air, space, quiet, something to soften the whirlwind inside her. She told the director she would be leaving early, and he nodded with understanding. But before she could exit through the back door, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see Keanu walking toward her, his expression gentle but concerned. He asked if she wanted to get some fresh air before heading home, offering to walk with her to the rooftop terrace. Her first instinct was to say no. She felt too exposed, too emotional, too confused by the weight of everything unfolding inside her. But something in his eyes made it impossible to refuse. He wasn't offering out of obligation or pity. He was offering because he genuinely wanted to make sure she was okay. She nodded slowly and followed him toward the rooftop stairs. The air on the terrace was cool and sharp, carrying the night breeze that brushed softly against her skin. The city lights stretched out below them, glowing like scattered stars across the darkness. Keanu waited for her to step out first, then closed the door behind them quietly. The sound sealed them into a peaceful world far away from the noise and questions inside the hotel. Sandra leaned on the metal railing, letting the cold air fill her lungs. It felt like the first real breath she had taken in hours. Keanu stood beside her, not too close, giving her the space she needed. They stayed silent for a long moment, letting the night calm the leftover storm. After a while, Sandra finally spoke. She told him she didn't understand why she had broken down so easily. She told him she usually handled pressure better, that she didn't like losing control in front of anyone. Keanu listened with gentle patience, and when she paused, he told her something that made her eyes soften. He said, "You didn't break down, you opened up. There's a difference. Breaking means you have no strength left. Opening means you trust someone enough to let them see the truth." His words settled between them like a warm blanket against the cold air. Sandra turned her head to look at him, her eyes glassy but calmer now. She whispered that she wasn't used to trusting people so deeply. He smiled gently, offering no judgment. He simply told her that trust isn't something that comes from effort. It grows naturally when it finds the right person. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let her heart beat slow as she listened to the wind brushing against the terrace railings. Finally, she whispered something that changed the air between them. "I trust you more than I trust anyone else." Keanu's expression softened in a way she wasn't prepared for. He didn't smile, but his eyes warmed with a tenderness she had rarely seen in anyone. He stepped a little closer, not enough to overwhelm her, but enough for her to feel the quiet comfort of his presence again. He said her trust meant more to him than she understood. He said he would never take it lightly. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt full of unspoken questions, quiet emotions, and a growing tension neither of them dared to name yet. Sandra didn't know how long they stayed there, standing side by side under the night sky, but she felt something shift inside her. She felt less alone. She felt understood. She felt seen in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel for years. When they finally walked back inside, the hallway lights were dimmed, and most of the crew had left. Sandra felt calmer, more grounded, but still unsure of what came next. They stopped at the same corner where their emotional moment had begun hours earlier. A soft memory of the way he held her hands touched her mind. For a second, she thought he might say something deeper, something that would change everything. But before either of them spoke, another unexpected voice called Sandra's name from the opposite end of the hallway. She turned slowly, her stomach tightening as she recognized the person walking toward them. Someone she hadn't expected to see tonight. Someone connected to the message that had shattered her calm earlier in the evening. The look on their face said they weren't there by accident. And as they stepped closer, Keanu instinctively moved a little nearer to Sandra, sensing her fear rising again. The hallway suddenly felt narrower. The night suddenly felt heavier. And whatever was about to be said next had the power to change everything between Sandra and Keanu, the visitor who shook everything. The moment Sandra saw the figure walking toward them, her breath caught in her throat. The hallway lights flickered slightly, as if reacting to the tension forming in the air. She felt Keanu's presence beside her, steady, protective, already sensing that the situation was about to unfold into something heavy. The person approaching was someone Sandra had dreaded facing tonight, someone whose unexpected message earlier had cracked the emotional ground beneath her feet. It was Jonathan, someone from her past who had once held a deep connection to her life, someone she had tried to distance herself from after things became painful and complicated. They had not spoken in a long time, and the message she received earlier reopened memories she had buried. She never expected him to show up at the hotel, especially not on a night when she already felt fragile. But now he was here, walking toward her with a mix of hesitation and determination. And Sandra's heart began to pound again. Keanu subtly shifted his weight, positioning himself so he could step in if needed, but not in a way that overwhelmed Sandra or embarrassed her. It was the quiet kind of protection, the kind that came from deep respect. Sandra noticed it, and though her fear continued rising, she felt a thin thread of courage hold her upright because he was standing beside her. Jonathan stopped a few feet away from them, his breath uneven as if he had rushed to find her. He greeted her softly, offering a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked nervous, almost guilty. Sandra didn't move closer, and Keanu didn't move back. The distance between the three of them felt like a barrier no one had the right words to cross. The silence stretched for a moment too long. Jonathan finally broke it by saying he had been trying to reach her all day, that he didn't mean to upset her, that he was sorry for showing up like this. His words spilled quickly, the way someone talks when they are unsure if they're welcome. Sandra stayed still, her fingers curling slightly with tension. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't know whether she had the emotional strength to handle this conversation tonight. Keanu watched her closely, giving her space to speak, but she could sense he was ready to step in if she needed support. The warmth of his presence grounded her, and she took a slow breath before finally answering Jonathan. She told him she wasn't prepared to talk tonight, that the message he sent had come at a difficult moment. Her voice trembled slightly, but she held her ground. Jonathan nodded quickly, understanding her hesitation but still desperate to explain himself. He said he had been carrying regret for years, that there were things he needed to say, things he should have said long ago. He looked emotional, struggling to keep his composure, and yet even as he spoke, Sandra felt her guard rise higher. This wasn't the time. This wasn't the place, not with her emotions already stretched thin. She told him gently but firmly that tonight wasn't the moment for this conversation. She said she needed time to think, that she needed space. Her voice cracked on the word space, and Keanu subtly inched closer, not touching her but making sure she felt supported. Jonathan glanced at Keanu then, noticing the shift, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe jealousy, or maybe just the understanding that Sandra wasn't alone anymore, not the way she used to be. Jonathan took a slow breath and apologized again. He said he hadn't meant to cause trouble. He said he had only come because he wanted to make things right. His voice carried sincerity, but Sandra wasn't ready to receive it. Too many old wounds were still open. Too many memories she wasn't ready to revisit. She told him they could talk another day, just not tonight. And as soon as she said it, Jonathan looked relieved. He stepped back, nodded, and told her he would wait for her to reach out when she was ready. He gave one final glance at Keanu, almost as if he was acknowledging the role Keanu now played in Sandra's life. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner until the hallway swallowed the sound of his footsteps. The silence that followed was heavy but different from before. Instead of panic, Sandra felt a wave of exhaustion wash through her. She leaned against the wall slowly, placing her hand on her chest as she tried to regulate her breathing. Keanu stepped forward, worry in his eyes, gently asking if she was okay. She nodded weakly, but her voice barely formed the word. Keanu didn't rush her. He stayed quiet, letting her gather herself. After a long moment, Sandra whispered that she didn't understand why Jonathan had come now, why he couldn't leave the past where it was. She told Keanu that she had finally built some peace in her life, and now everything felt shaken again. Keanu listened carefully, his expression soft but protective. He told her she didn't owe her past anything tonight. He reminded her that facing old pain didn't mean surrendering to it. But something inside Sandra shifted as she looked at him. She realized Keanu had been her anchor again, not just in the hallway earlier, but now too. He had stood beside her through a moment she couldn't handle alone. And for the first time, she began to understand just how deeply he cared for her, not with dramatic actions, not with loud declarations, but with quiet, unwavering presence. She whispered, "You keep showing up for me. I don't know how to thank you." Keanu shook his head gently, telling her she didn't need to thank him for caring. He said he wanted to be there, not because he felt responsible, but because she mattered to him more than she realized. His voice was soft, tender, but firm in its honesty. And Sandra felt a warmth rise in her chest, soft, heavy, and frightening all at once. Their eyes locked, and the hallway seemed to fade away. There was something unspoken between them, something real and deep that had been building for months. Sandra felt her breath slow, her shoulders relax, her heart open just slightly in a way she hadn't allowed before. She whispered his name, and he held her gaze with an intensity that made her chest tighten. Before either of them could say more, the sound of two people approaching echoed through the hallway again. Sandra stepped back instinctively, brushing her fingers against her face as if wiping away an emotion she wasn't ready to show. Keanu turned slightly, placing himself between her and the approaching voices without making it obvious. His instinct to protect her surfaced again, quietly but powerfully. The two approaching crew members were talking about something unrelated, schedule changes, rehearsal updates. But when they saw Sandra and Keanu at the end of the hallway, they paused for a moment longer than necessary. One of them smiled politely, but there was curiosity in their eyes. Sandra quickly forced a small smile in return, trying to seem composed. Keanu kept his posture neutral, calm, unbothered, but he sensed her discomfort rising again. Once the crew members passed, Sandra let out a soft exhale. She whispered that she didn't want tonight's emotions to become public conversation, that she didn't want rumors or speculation. Keanu nodded, understanding completely. He told her she didn't owe the world an explanation for anything, and he said something that made her look at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. He said, "Whatever you're afraid of facing, we'll handle it together. I'm not going anywhere." Those words settled in her heart like warm light, soothing the last tremors of fear. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't know how to put into words the gratitude, the vulnerability, the quiet affection she felt for him. Instead, she asked him if he would walk her to her car. Her voice was soft, unsure, but honest. Keanu agreed without hesitation. They walked slowly toward the exit, their steps quiet on the polished floor. Sandra felt calmer with every step, as if the heaviness of the night was slowly loosening its grip. But even with the soft comfort of Keanu beside her, something inside her still twisted with uncertainty. Tonight had shown her how fragile emotions could be, how quickly life could shift. And as they reached the back doors of the building, she felt an overwhelming sense of vulnerability sweep through her again. The night air outside was cool and gentle, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers from the hotel garden. Sandra stopped next to her car but didn't open the door. Instead, she turned to face Keanu, her eyes searching his. She told him she didn't know if she was strong enough to deal with what was coming next. She told him she worried that her past would pull her down again. She told him she was afraid of hurting the people she cared about, including him. Keanu stepped closer, slow and careful, and placed his hand on her arm. His touch was warm and steady, grounding her again. He told her she was stronger than she believed. He told her she had survived worse storms. He told her that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. His voice was calm but filled with emotion that made her chest tighten. She leaned into him just slightly, closing her eyes as she let the warmth of his presence settle around her. The world felt distant. The night felt safer because he was there. But then something unexpected happened. A camera flashed. A loud, bright burst of light from across the parking lot. Someone had taken a photo. Sandra jerked away from Keanu in shock. Keanu turned sharply toward the direction of the flash. In the shadows behind a parked car, someone moved, a figure holding a camera, running away quickly before either of them could react. And in that moment, Sandra's heart sank. Their private moment was no longer private. Someone had seen them. Someone had captured it. And tomorrow, everything could change when the world suddenly entered their moment. Flash burned in Sandra's vision long after it disappeared, leaving a cold, sinking sensation in her stomach that she couldn't shake. For a second, she didn't even move. It felt as if the entire night collapsed into that brief burst of light, capturing something intimate, something raw, something neither she nor Keanu had ever planned to reveal. Her breath caught halfway in her throat, and she felt herself freeze, not from fear alone, but from the shock of being exposed when she had been at her most vulnerable. Keanu reacted first. His entire posture shifted, his calm presence turning sharply alert. He took one step forward, trying to see who the photographer was, but the figure had already disappeared behind the tall row of parked cars near the far exit. A car door slammed in the distance, followed by the screech of tires as someone sped away. The sound echoed across the lot, cold and final, like the closing of a chapter they weren't ready to let go of. Sandra's heart thudded painfully. Her hands trembled as she reached for the car door, but her fingers slipped against the metal. She whispered, barely audible, "Keanu, what do we do?" He turned back toward her immediately, all focus shifting from the escaping intruder to her trembling state. He placed a gentle hand on her arm, but this time she didn't lean into him. Instead, she felt herself pull back slightly, as if the flash had erected a barrier she didn't know how to cross. Her panic wasn't about the image alone. It was about what the world could make of it, how easily the truth could be twisted when placed in the wrong hands. Keanu saw her withdrawing, and it hurt him quietly, though he didn't show it. He spoke softly, telling her to breathe, telling her they didn't know yet what had been captured. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the camera wasn't directed at them. Maybe there was still a chance that the moment remained theirs. But Sandra shook her head, her voice trembling harder. "They saw us too close. They saw the way you were holding my arm." She pressed her palm against her forehead, trying to force steadiness into her spiraling thoughts. "Keanu, if this goes out, if people twist it, I can't handle another wave of rumors. Not now, not like this." Keanu stepped closer, the concern on his face deepening. He wanted to tell her that they hadn't done anything wrong. That comfort wasn't a crime, that kindness wasn't scandalous, that friendship wasn't something to hide. But he knew how the world worked. He had lived long enough under the bright, unforgiving lens of public attention to understand how quickly narratives were invented, how easily truth was reshaped by speculation. He couldn't lie to her, and so his voice softened. He told her the only thing he could, that they would face whatever came together, and that he wouldn't let her deal with the fallout alone. But Sandra wasn't ready to hear that. She felt as if her chest was closing in. Thoughts of Jonathan, the message, the unexpected reunion, the emotional breakdown in the hallway, all of it combined into a storm she couldn't outrun. She whispered that maybe she should have left earlier. Maybe she should have kept more distance. Maybe none of this would have happened if she hadn't let her guard down. Keanu gently but firmly shook his head. He stepped close enough that she could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing, grounding her again. He told her that she didn't cause this. He reminded her that vulnerability wasn't a weakness. He reminded her that seeking comfort wasn't something to fear. But Sandra felt the weight of the world pressing on her, and even his calm voice couldn't fully steady her heart. She finally managed to open her car door, her hands still shaking. Keanu reached out, not stopping her but offering one last moment of reassurance. "Please drive safe," he whispered. "Text me when you get home. I'll stay awake until I know you're okay." She nodded faintly, her throat too tight to speak. When she sat inside the car and closed the door, she didn't start the engine immediately. She kept her hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at the night sky. Keanu stepped back slowly, giving her space, but not leaving until she finally drove away. He watched her taillights disappear through the hotel gates and only then allowed the worry to show in his eyes. Sandra's drive home felt longer than usual. The city lights blurred softly through her windshield, not because of tears, but because her mind kept spinning in circles she couldn't escape. She replayed the moment of the flash again and again, the angle, the timing, the way Keanu had been standing close to her. She feared the worst. She feared a headline she didn't want. She feared that the world would take a gentle moment of support and turn it into a spectacle. When she finally reached her house, she sat in her parked car for several minutes, unable to move. The quiet around her pressed heavily against her thoughts. She closed her eyes and exhaled a long, trembling breath, trying to release the panic still trapped inside her chest. Eventually, she picked up her phone and typed a message to Keanu. "I'm home." She stared at the screen for a few seconds before sending it. His reply came almost immediately. "I'm glad, get some rest. I'm here if you need anything." His words soothed her, but only slightly. She locked her phone, stepped out of the car, and walked inside her home, feeling the silence of the rooms press around her like a weight. Tonight, she didn't turn on the television or dim the lights. She simply curled up on her sofa, pulling a blanket around her shoulders as her mind continued to churn. Meanwhile, Keanu remained in the hotel parking lot long after she left. He replayed the moment too, the flash, the shadowed figure, the sudden escape. Something about it felt wrong. It didn't feel like a coincidence or an accidental intrusion. The way the person had positioned themselves, the way they fled, it felt intentional, calculated. Someone wanted that photo. Keanu walked to his motorcycle but didn't leave yet. Instead, he took out his phone and sent a message to a trusted friend in the industry, someone experienced in handling media leaks and paparazzi intrusion. He explained what happened, asked if anyone had heard whispers or seen activity around the hotel. Then he waited. Minutes later, he received a response. There was a tabloid photographer spotted near the hotel entrance earlier. Someone might have tipped them off. Keanu exhaled slowly. This was worse than he expected. Someone didn't just happen to be there. Someone knew something. Someone wanted something. He looked toward the hotel doors, thinking about the long hallway where Sandra had broken down, thinking about Jonathan's sudden appearance, thinking about how fragile she had been tonight. He knew she wouldn't be able to handle another emotional blow. Not now. Not when she was still processing everything else she had faced. Keanu made a silent promise to himself. He would protect her from whatever was coming. The next morning was heavy long before the sun even fully rose. Sandra woke early, her stomach twisting with unease before she even opened her eyes. She checked her phone immediately, half hoping nothing had happened, half fearing everything had. There were no messages, no missed calls from the outside world, but that didn't calm her. Sometimes silence was more frightening than noise. She made herself coffee, but her hands were still unsteady. She paced through her living room, replaying every detail of last night. She knew she needed to be strong today. She knew she couldn't hide forever. But she also knew that one leaked photo could unravel her stability overnight. At around 9 in the morning, her phone buzzed with a message from Keanu. "I'm coming over, don't worry, we'll figure this out." Her heart tightened. She wanted to tell him not to. She wanted to protect him from being pulled into the center of something he didn't deserve. But a part of her, deep, quiet, and scared, wanted him there, needed him there. She didn't reply yet. She waited, holding her phone, unsure of the right choice. But before she could decide, another notification appeared. This time, it wasn't from Keanu. It was from her manager. And the preview of the message made her entire body freeze. "Sandra, call me as soon as possible. Something has leaked." Her breath shattered. Her coffee cup slipped from her hands and cracked against the floor, spilling across the tiles. Her heart pounded violently in her chest as she opened the message fully. The photo was already spreading. A blurry but unmistakable shot of her and Keanu in the parking lot. Her leaning slightly toward him, his hand on her arm. Two people captured in a moment of raw sincerity and closeness. The caption below the leaked image already speculated everything she feared. And as she stared at the screen, trembling so hard she could barely keep the phone in her hand, a new message appeared. This time it was from an unknown number. "You should have talked to me when you had the chance." Her stomach dropped. The timing, the tone, the implication. She knew exactly who had sent it. Jonathan. And suddenly, the night before felt different. Sharper, more dangerous. Because now the leak wasn't just a coincidence. It was connected. And someone was trying to force her into a confrontation she wasn't ready for. Her phone buzzed again. This time with Keanu's message. "I'm 5 minutes away. Don't open the door for anyone else." Sandra's hands shook violently. Because she already sensed. This was only the beginning, the truth that finally rose to the surface. The knock on Sandra's door came exactly 5 minutes after Keanu's message. It wasn't loud or urgent, but it carried a weight that made her heart stop for a moment. She stood frozen in the middle of her living room, her phone still trembling in her hand, the leaked photo burning in her mind like a sharp wound. Everything inside her felt raw and unsteady. Fear, confusion, disbelief, and exhaustion collided inside her, turning her thoughts into a storm she could no longer navigate alone. When the knock came again, gentler this time, she forced her legs to move. Her steps were small, almost hesitant, until she finally reached the door. She didn't open it immediately. She pressed her forehead against the wood and whispered almost breathlessly, "Keanu." His voice came through with a softness that released the air she had been holding in her chest. "It's me." Her trembling fingers unlocked the door, and when she opened it, Keanu immediately saw the panic in her eyes. He stepped inside without hesitation, closing the door behind him. The moment they were in the same room, the weight she had been carrying shifted, loosening just enough for her to feel the first hint of relief, like a fragile thread of safety pulling her away from breaking. Keanu didn't speak right away. He set down the bag he brought, a bag that held nothing but tea, water, and a blanket he thought she might need. Because he knew her well enough to understand that small comforts meant everything when her world felt unstable. Then he looked at her with an expression that held both worry and determination. "Show me," he said softly. Sandra handed him her phone without a word. Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly as he stared at the leaked image. It was blurred but unmistakable. Someone had captured the exact moment he had placed his hand on her arm, right before she pulled back in shock. The lighting made it look more intimate than it had actually been, but even if it hadn't, the moment itself had been real, quiet, vulnerable, emotional. As Keanu studied the image, Sandra watched his jaw tighten slightly. She could see him processing every possible angle, every possible consequence. He was the kind of person who always thought through things carefully, who refused to react emotionally until he understood the full picture. But she could also see the flicker of anger behind his calm eyes, the quiet anger of someone who hated seeing someone he cared for being invaded, manipulated, or hurt. He finally set the phone down on the counter. Then he turned toward her again and asked the question she had been dreading. "Who sent you that message before I got here?" Sandra swallowed hard, her eyes dropping. She didn't want to say it out loud. She didn't want to bring more darkness into the room. But Keanu waited, patient and steady, refusing to let her carry this alone. After a long pause, she whispered, "It was Jonathan." Keanu's expression tightened, not with jealousy, not with frustration, but with a deep, sharp concern. He had sensed something was wrong from the moment Jonathan appeared in the hallway the night before. Now everything felt connected, too connected to be coincidence. "What did he say?" Keanu asked quietly. Sandra picked up her phone with shaky fingers and showed him the message. "You should have talked to me when you had the chance." Keanu read it once, then again, as if trying to understand the intention behind the words. When he finally looked back at her, his eyes softened with a compassion that nearly broke her. He stepped closer slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she didn't. She needed him close. She needed his steadiness more than air. He placed a gentle hand on her arm, mirroring the gesture from the parking lot, but with even more warmth. "This isn't your fault," he said quietly, And you don't have to face any of this alone. The words hit her like a soft wave, steady enough to comfort but strong enough to pull emotion from her heart. She swallowed hard and shook her head. Keanu, if the media makes this into something it's not, if they drag you into this. But he didn't let her finish. Stop, he whispered. I'm here because I want to be here, not because I'm being dragged into anything. She looked at him, tears forming in her eyes. But I don't want to ruin your peace. I don't want this to hurt you. He let out a slow breath. You could never ruin anything, and I'm not afraid of being seen supporting someone I care about. The words someone I care about were soft but heavy enough to shift the space between them. Sandra's chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something deeper. Something warm, something she had been trying to ignore. They stood in silence for a moment that felt suspended in time. She felt his warmth, his sincerity, his quiet strength. She finally whispered, I don't know how to handle any of this. Keanu nodded gently, then let me help you. They moved into the living room, sitting on the sofa where Sandra had spent the earlier morning spiraling alone. Now, with Keanu beside her, the room felt less heavy. Not empty, not healed, but less suffocating. She curled her legs under her and held a pillow close to her chest while Keanu sat beside her, calm and protective. He asked her to tell him everything about Jonathan, the past, the message, the pain she had tried to bury. She hesitated at first, not because she didn't trust Keanu, but because speaking the truth out loud meant confronting parts of her life she had avoided for years. But Keanu waited with patience that never pressured her, and slowly, Sandra began to talk. She told him about the long relationship she once had with Jonathan, how it had started with promise but ended with disappointment. She told Keanu about the betrayal she endured, the heartbreak she had fought hard to recover from. She told him about the guilt she carried, the mistakes she made, the lessons she learned. She spoke about how hard she worked to rebuild her confidence after everything shattered. And she told him how the message last night felt like a ghost pulling her backward into a place she no longer belonged. Keanu listened to every word without interrupting. He didn't judge. He didn't question her choices. He didn't minimize her pain. Instead, he placed a hand on her back, gentle, steady, encouraging, letting her know he was there, fully present. When she finally finished, she felt lighter. Drained, but lighter. She hadn't realized how much weight she had been carrying until speaking it aloud released something inside her. Keanu took a slow breath and finally responded. None of that defines you, he said in a low voice. And whatever Jonathan wants now, it doesn't give him the right to use your past against you. Sandra looked down, her voice soft. But what if he's the one who tipped off the photographer? What if he's trying to force me to talk to him? Keanu didn't answer right away. He had considered that possibility the moment he saw the leaked photo, and he didn't doubt that someone desperate for attention or closure might take advantage of the situation. But before he could speak, Sandra lifted her head and looked at him. There was pain in her eyes, but also a fragile hope. Keanu, why do you always show up for me? Why do you care so much? I don't understand why you stay. The question hit him deeply. He didn't look away. He didn't hide from it. He leaned slightly closer, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel the sincerity in his voice. I stay because I want to, he said softly. I stay because you matter to me, more than you know. Her breath caught. Her chest tightened. Something inside her, something she had kept locked behind walls of fear and self-protection, began to open. Keanu continued, even quieter now. I don't care what people say, I don't care what rumors start. I care about you, and I'm not going anywhere. Sandra felt emotion rise thick in her throat. She blinked slowly, trying to steady herself, but her heart was already beating differently, faster, fuller, warmer. He reached toward her, hesitating for a moment, giving her room to pull away. She didn't. His hand brushed the side of her face gently, like a promise spoken without words. Her eyes softened, her breath trembled. For a moment, it felt as if time held still, like the world outside no longer existed, like the leaked image, the message, the fear. All of it faded in the presence of something stronger. But the moment was interrupted by a new sound. A sharp, unexpected knock on the door. Both of them froze. Sandra's heart leapt painfully into her throat. Keanu's posture changed instantly, alert, protective. She whispered, voice barely audible, I'm not expecting anyone. The knock came again, louder this time. Keanu stood slowly, motioning for her to stay back. He stepped toward the door with careful, controlled movements. Sandra felt her entire body tense, dread tightening around her like a cold grip. When Keanu reached the door, he didn't open it immediately. He asked, "Who is it?" Silence. Then a low voice answered. "Sandra, it's me. We need to talk." "Jonathan." "At her house." "Uninvited." Keanu looked back at Sandra, his eyes darkening with concern. Sandra felt her knees weaken. The world was closing in again. And this time, walking away wouldn't be enough. The moment that changed their hearts forever. The sound of Jonathan's voice behind the door struck Sandra like a sudden drop in temperature, freezing her breath halfway in her chest. She gripped the edge of the sofa, her fingers tightening until her knuckles hurt. Her mind raced, fear rising again in a fast wave that threatened to undo all the calm she had begun to rebuild beside Keanu. Keanu, standing at the door, didn't move immediately. He stayed perfectly still, shoulders squared, posture calm but protective. He wasn't a man who reacted with anger or needless confrontation. He thought before he acted, but he also didn't allow danger or manipulation to cross a boundary without stepping forward. His voice was steady when he spoke again. "This isn't a good time," he said through the closed door. "You need to leave." Jonathan ignored him. His voice came again, tighter, more urgent, but not loud enough for neighbors to hear. "Sandra, please, I just want to talk. You didn't answer me. I didn't mean for things to go this far." Sandra felt a twist of dread in her chest. She hadn't expected Jonathan to cross this line, to show up uninvited, to push past the boundaries she so clearly needed. And now the leaked photo, the message, and this sudden visit felt connected in a way she could no longer ignore. Keanu looked back at her, silently asking if she wanted him to handle it. Sandra swallowed hard and slowly stood, her legs shaky beneath her. She took a deep breath, trying to draw strength from Keanu's presence. "I should talk to him," she whispered. Keanu's eyes softened but remained serious. "Only if you want to, and you don't open this door without me beside you." She nodded. Fear still pulsed through her, but Keanu's calm steadiness anchored her. She stepped closer to him until she was by his side. He placed one hand lightly on the door handle, then looked at her again, checking, confirming, making sure she was ready. She nodded once. Keanu opened the door halfway, positioning himself slightly ahead so Jonathan couldn't enter the house. Jonathan's expression shifted the moment he saw Sandra behind Keanu. Guilt flickered across his face, followed by regret, followed by something unsettled, something that looked almost desperate. He lifted his hands slightly, palms out, as if to show he wasn't a threat. "Sandra, I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't be here without asking, but I panicked when you didn't respond. I didn't mean for anything to happen. I didn't." "Stop," Sandra said quietly, her voice steady but fragile. "You being here right now, this isn't okay." Jonathan swallowed, glancing at Keanu again. "I know. I saw the photo online. I thought maybe it was my fault. I thought maybe you were ignoring me because of everything. I didn't leak it, I swear." Sandra looked at him sharply. "Then why did you send me that message?" Jonathan exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. "Because I thought you were avoiding me. I thought if I didn't push, I'd never get the chance to fix things. When I saw you in the hallway last night, I realized how much I'd hurt you. And then today, everything blew up online. I made it worse. I know that." Keanu watched him carefully, not speaking, but clearly reading every word, every expression. Jonathan continued, voice trembling. "I didn't leak anything, but someone must have tipped the press about you two being at the hotel. Maybe they were already following. Maybe they caught the moment by accident. I don't know, but I didn't send anyone." Sandra studied his face. Part of her wanted to believe him. Part of her feared it could still be a lie. But the exhaustion in his eyes, the remorse in his posture, the way he kept his distance, it didn't feel calculated. It felt like someone who had made too many mistakes and didn't know how to stop hurting the people he cared about. She took a slow breath. "Jonathan, you can't show up here like this. My life isn't something you get to walk into anymore." Jonathan nodded slowly, his eyes dropping. "I know, and I'm sorry, truly. I just needed to tell you that I didn't want to cause more damage. I didn't want you thinking I was trying to ruin things for you." Keanu shifted almost imperceptibly. Not threatening, not confrontational, but present, watching, grounded. Jonathan looked at Keanu directly then. "You're here for her, I can see that. I'm glad she has someone." His voice broke slightly. I wasn't that for her, and I regret it every day. Sandra felt a sting of sympathy, but also a wave of clarity. She stepped closer to Keanu, letting that movement speak a truth she hadn't said aloud yet. "Jonathan, I need you to let me go," she said softly. "I don't hate you. I don't want anything bad for you, but I can't go backward, not anymore." Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment as if absorbing the finality of her words. When he opened them again, they were sad but accepting. He nodded slowly, almost painfully. "I understand, and I'll leave you alone, I promise." He stepped back from the doorway. "I'm sorry, Sandra, for everything." He gave one last glance to Keanu, a silent acknowledgement of something heavier than words, then turned and walked away. They watched him until he disappeared down the path. When the door finally closed, Sandra felt her entire body collapse into emotional exhaustion. She leaned against the door, sliding down until she sat on the floor. Her breathing was uneven, her hands shaking. Keanu came down slowly, sitting beside her without touching her yet. He waited until her breathing steadied slightly before speaking. "You handled that with so much strength," he whispered. She shook her head weakly. "I didn't feel strong." "But you were," he said softly. "You didn't run, you didn't break, you faced something painful with honesty." She turned her head toward him. Her eyes were glossy with unshed tears. "I felt like I was falling apart inside." "It's okay to fall apart," he replied gently, "as long as you don't fall alone." Those words, simple, steady, warm, melted something inside her that had been hardened by years of fear and hurt. She reached for his hand without thinking, her fingers trembling. He took her hand immediately, holding it carefully, as if it was something fragile but precious. They sat like that for a long moment, hand in hand, the quiet around them no longer heavy but comforting. Sandra finally spoke, her voice softer than a whisper. "Keanu, thank you for staying, for not letting me face this alone." He turned fully toward her, their hands still linked. There was something new in his eyes now, something deeper, something unmistakably tender. "I stayed because I care," he said softly. "I've cared for a long time." Her breath caught. "Keanu." He inched slightly closer, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He lifted his free hand and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather-light, but it sent warmth through her entire body. "You're not alone," he whispered. "Not now, not ever, if you don't want to be." Her heart opened in that moment, fully and finally. All the fear, all the doubt, all the walls she had built, it all softened in the warmth of his honesty. Sandra leaned closer, her forehead gently touching his. Her eyes closed, her breath trembled. "I don't want to be alone," she whispered. Keanu exhaled softly, a warm breath against her skin, filled with emotion he had kept quiet for too long. He squeezed her hand gently. "Then you're not," he whispered, "not with me." They stayed like that, forehead to forehead, hand in hand, for a long, quiet moment that felt like a beginning, not an ending. The leaked photo, the rumors, the fear, all of it still existed. The world outside would still talk, but in that soft moment on the floor of her living room, none of it mattered. Because they weren't alone anymore. Because trust had finally taken root. Because love, the quiet, real kind they had both been afraid to admit, had finally found its way into the open. The next days were difficult, full of calls, statements, and noise from the media, but Sandra wasn't facing it alone now. Keanu stood beside her in every room, in every meeting, in every moment of fear. He didn't speak for her, he supported her. He didn't shield her from the world, he helped her stand stronger in it. And slowly the storm calmed. What people thought didn't matter as much. What the headlines said didn't change the truth. They knew what was real between them. Their soft love, gentle, patient, grounded, became their anchor. And the hallway where everything began became the memory of the moment. The world first saw what their hearts had known for a long time. They belonged beside each other. Not because of drama, not because of rumor, but because of something quiet, honest, and lasting.